Jailton Almeida will ragdoll Alexander Volkov.
Jailton Almeida! Here is the budding heavyweight contender, Jailton Almeida. Came off of Dana White's Contender Series.
205, 6'3", good reach as well.
The submissions that he's got are incredible.
But I've got a feeling this kid's gonna go a long way.
Wow. Jailton Almeida is here to stay.
Volkov vs Almeida are set for the main card of UFC 321, and although a lot of fans are siding with Volkov at this point, I'm here to tell you that Jailton will not only win, but he'll ragdoll Alexander Volkov. But quickly, before we get the video started, my name is JuicyMMA, I make opinionative MMA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, as only 10% of you watching are actually subscribed. And also, if you want the inside scoop and extra breakdowns you won't see anywhere else, hit that join button for members only videos, members only live streams, alongside with other fun perks like badges and emojis as well. But anyways, let's get into it. When you take a look at the career of Jailton Almeida, it's definitely a very interesting one, because on one hand, he was able to look very good in a lot of his performances, and when you talk about some of the fighters at the heavyweight division that Jailton was able to beat, it's certainly a pretty solid list, as he was able to beat guys like Jairzinho Rozenstruik, Derek Lewis, Alexander Romanov, and most recently Sergey Spivak. Obviously not the greatest fighters in the world, but when you talk about for the heavyweight division, it's definitely not a bad list of fighters he was able to beat. And also, in a lot of those performances that I mentioned, Jailton was not only able to beat his opponents, but he was able to dominate them. But although in most of Jailton's performances he's been able to look very good, at the same time there has been a couple of weird performances sprinkled in. As when you look at his performance against Derek Lewis, it was a really odd performance. As although Jailton was able to have a ton of success and he probably should have won the fight 50-43, at the end of the day it was just very odd to watch a guy continuously find easy takedowns against his opponent, get into full mount very easily, but at the same time do no damage and of course not find a finish. So after that Derek Lewis fight came and gone, although it was a very dominant and a very easy performance for Jailton, at the same time there's a lot of fans walking away from that fight thinking maybe Jailton isn't as good as we initially thought. And then when you look at Jailton's next fight after Derek Lewis, you talk about his performance against Curtis Blaydes, and in that matchup against Blaydes, it was also kind of a weird fight as well, as in the first round Jailton was having a lot of success, as although he wasn't controlling Curtis Blaydes on the ground, he was essentially tossing around a 300-pound man in that fight for the entire first round. It was almost comical to watch. But in that second round, early in that second round, Jailton got in a weird spot and he ended up getting finished. So although there is a lot to like about Jailton Almeida, he puts on a lot of good performances, he's been able to finish a lot of his opponents. At the same time, you occasionally see these weird performances like the Derek Lewis one, as well as the Curtis Blaydes one. But a question that some of you may be wondering at this point is, why do I think Jailton Almeida is going to ragdoll Alexander Volkov? Well, in my opinion, it comes down to a couple different factors, but the first and main factor I want to touch upon is Jailton Almeida's wrestling. Because when you take a look at Jailton's wrestling ability, it's pretty clear that he has good technique, but also on top of that, Jailton is an absolute freak athlete. As although he's not the biggest guy for heavyweight, it just doesn't really matter, as he does have good wrestling technique, but also on top of that, as I said, he is a freak athlete. And he's able to toss around guys that are significantly bigger than him. We saw it in his fight against Derek Lewis, we saw it in his fight against Curtis Blaydes, and going into this fight against Volkov, I do think Jailton is not only going to be able to find takedowns, but I think he's going to be able to find takedowns relatively easily against Volkov. Because also, when you take a look at Volkov, although he has been improving his wrestling game for sure, at the end of the day, he's still nowhere near the wrestling caliber of Jailton, and also, if Jailton was able to toss around and take down Curtis Blaydes relatively easily, I think he'll be able to do the same, but probably even easier to a guy like Volkov. But the next factor for why I think Jailton Almeida is going to ragdoll Volkov is due to his athleticism. Because when you take a look at Volkov, he is actually pretty skilled. On the feet, he's consistently getting better, and at this point, he's probably the best he's ever been. And even on the ground, he's making significant improvements, and he's also working on his jiu-jitsu game as well. But when you take a look at some of the fighters that over the years Volkov has had trouble with, it's against guys that are very athletic. If you look at the Tom Aspinall fight, or even the first Cyril Gane fight, it was very clear that Volkov Volkov just wasn't able to keep up with the speed and athleticism of his opponents. And when you look at this specific matchup versus Jailton Almeida, he's also insanely athletic as well. And in this performance, obviously what Volkov is going to want to do out there is stop takedowns, stay on the feet, and stay at range. But when he's going up against somebody who's literally twice or maybe 3 times as athletic as Volkov is, it's going to be very difficult for him to stay away from the takedown shots of Jailton. And as I touched upon before, if Jailton is able to get close to Volkov and he's able to get his hands locked, he's going to be able to most likely toss around Alexander Volkov. So I definitely do think the athleticism is also going to be a huge factor in this fight as well. And of course, once the fight does get to the ground, Jailton is also going to have a huge advantage there as well. As when you look at a lot of Jailton's performances, I think at this point it's pretty clear that he's a legitimate jiu-jitsu practitioner and he's legitimately very good on the ground. And although, as I mentioned before in the video, Volkov has made improvements on the ground, at the end of the day, he's going to be relatively green, at least as compared to a guy like Jailton Almeida. So once the fight does go to the ground, Jailton will have a pretty big advantage, and I do think he'll probably find a finish one way or the other, whether it's by submission or whether it's via a TKO. Now, although I do think there are a lot of possibilities, and on paper, Jailton Almeida probably should win this fight versus Alexander Volkov, at the same time, there is some variance. As I touched upon before in the video, there have been a couple of occasions where Jailton has made some bad decisions, and he's lost a couple of fights that he probably should have won. So going into this fight against Volkov, if Jailton makes a couple of bad decisions out there, he certainly could lose. Because the clear path to victory for Jailton is finding a takedown and finding a submission or ground and pound shots on the ground. But if Jailton makes a couple bad decisions out there and all of a sudden we're having an extended period of time where the fight is on the feet, I don't think it's going to go all that well for Jailton. Because although Jailton is elite on the ground, he's nowhere near the level of a Volkov or honestly even anybody else at the heavyweight division on the feet. On the feet, all that Jailton is trying to do is find a takedown. He is athletic enough and fast enough to stay away from a lot of the big shots his opponents are throwing his way, but he's not really throwing anything offensive of his own. So as I said before, if there's any sort of extended period on the feet, it's going to be advantage Volkov. But if I had to give my official prediction for this matchup, I would lean towards a Jailton Almeida first round submission. As I said before, I do think Volkov is a really good fighter and he does a lot of things well, both on the feet as well as on the ground, but at the same time, he just struggles a lot with guys that are super athletic, and I just don't see a world where he's able to stay away from Jailton Almeida for 3 rounds and not get taken down. And as I said before, if this fight does go to the ground, it's certainly going to be advantage Almeida. So I think essentially what's going to happen is early on, Almeida is quickly going to shoot in for a takedown, he'll find a takedown, and once the fight does get to the ground, maybe it won't be on the first shot, maybe it won't be on the second shot, but eventually, once the fight does get to the ground, I think it's going to be a submission victory for Jailton. Whether it's a rear naked choke, whether it's an armbar, or whether it's something else, I do think we're going to be talking about a first round submission victory for Jailton Almeida. And if Jailton is able to win at UFC 321, his opponent is going to be determined on that same card, as he will be fighting for the belt next, either against Tom Aspinall or against Ciryl Gane. Out of those 2 potential matchups, I think Jailton is probably rooting for Ciryl Gane to win that fight, as Ciryl is a much easier stylistic matchup for Jailton than Tom Aspinall is, but one way or the other, if Jailton's able to beat Volkov, he will get a title shot. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Jailton Almeida is going to get past Volkov, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these 2 videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.